that we talked about back then have been affected by the pandemic, especially. I mean, I think it was very interesting to see all the other trends, all the other say events or the other things that are happening that influence our society that Martin put up. I will be focusing pretty much on COVID in my presentation. So as I said, I think at the time there's four mega trends that we've been seeing for now at least a number of years. We've been discussing this, that have been increasing the need for upskilling and for reskilling in the labor market. On the one hand, technology. So I think I told you about the risk of automation and about jobs that might be automated. We put the number to about 15%. And then there is another significant share of jobs, another third, that might not be automated entirely, but that would change significantly because the tasks that people do for those jobs will be changing. Then there's population aging, where we know that again there's populations are getting older, particularly in European countries. The last time we counted, which was about 2017, the dependency ratio, which is the share of older people per people between 15 and 64, so work age people, was about 25%, and we expect that to go to 50% in the next few years. So we'll have a lot more older people per for each person who is of working age. Globalization as well is another big trend. We've seen the offshoring of production, sometimes the offshoring of tasks based on the competitive advantage of different countries. So this is just a number that exemplifies that 1 in 4 of the jobs in our economies is supported, sustained by consumer demand in another country. And then something that perhaps I didn't mention quite as much at the time, the green transition. So we see the transition to a greener economy as changing the skills demand, the demand for skills in the labor market for many reasons. So there's both going to be jobs that are focused on green sectors, but there's also going to be a general structural restructuring. We call it green restructuring, in the sense that some sectors that are fuel intensive may decline, and then there's a growth of sectors that are more focused on clean energy, and the result might not be green skills, but it will still be a reshuffling based on how these sectors are made up in terms of occupation, a reshuffling of what is needed in the labor market. So how is COVID affecting this picture? I think there's two aspects. That's the way I like to look at it. On the one hand, we have the cyclical impact. So we have something that's happening now, a significant rise in unemployment for graduates in particular. There's a strong cohort effect, in the sense that graduates that have graduated this summer, so those who are entering the labor market now, face very difficult conditions. In particular, I mean, this is always the case to some extent. I mean, graduates, in general, school leavers, not just graduates, but also those who finish high school, those who enter the labor market at the time of a recession, face a very difficult situation, because the first thing firms do is stop hiring. They don't fire, they actually stop hiring, rightly so in a way. They hold on to their workforce, but then they stop taking on new people, which means that for young people who are looking for work, this is a very big problem. I think it's aggravated in this particular case by many things. One, mostly by the disruption in learning. Many of those who are graduating now didn't have an opportunity to do internships that sometimes were already planned because they were no longer possible. We at OECD, even by regulation, could not take interns on. By definition, an intern has to be in the workplace. So even universities did not contemplate the possibility of a virtual internship. We do now. So it's taken a couple of months, which is pretty fast, to change rules that were quite ingrained, but we didn't at the time. For those who are doing apprenticeships or work-based learning, so perhaps less relevant to universities, they also saw this completely interrupted because the work-based part could not be delivered online. And there's another aspect that graduate unemployment normally is mitigated by the fact that some of those who would have entered the labor market say, oh, well, I can't find a job. I'll go on to do a master, for example. Or if I'm in high school, I'll go on to university. So in a way that tends to reduce the risk that there is a lost generation. But we know that in this particular situation, there's also a lot of uncertainty regarding the quality of education they might be able to get because of the delivery online. So that universities enrollments are down to some extent, and so are enrollments, for example, in vocational education and training. Another big aspect is that the pandemic, and Martin has hinted at that a little bit, might have accelerated, I say changed the progression of some of the mega trends that I've just mentioned. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about it. In terms of the cyclical effect, this is, I find, a very striking graph and a very striking number. We've basically, over a few months, wiped out 10 years of progress on the labor market. So we had just got back to the level of unemployment pre-global financial crisis, and now it's all gone. We're back to the start. So this, I think, is quite striking, considering that it all happened in just a few months, and considering that unemployment is not up as much as it will be in many countries. Many countries that still have short time work schemes, or still job retention scheme, whatever they call it. So those people technically are still not counted as unemployment. So as these will be rolled, will be withdrawn gradually, we're probably going to see a lot of people not able to return to the jobs they had before. So a lot of additional unemployment entries. As I said before, there's been a massive decline in firms hiring. This data comes from big data, so comes from vacancies scraped online. And you can see that across the board, hiring was down between February and June. The UK was one of the countries that saw the biggest decline in hiring. Again, this I've said before, the cohort effect is stronger due to a lot of learning disruption, school closures, internship and apprenticeships cancellation. On the structural side, again, we've been arguing for a while that the COVID crisis will accelerate the digital transformation. So we're now starting to see some evidence of that. First, we were basing our claims on past recessions. So for example, in the context of the global financial crisis, there have been actually just very recently, the first few papers coming out on the 10 years after the financial crisis, showing that there was an increase in skill requirements. Generally, this happens because at the time of a crisis, you have a lot of structural change that's easier to implement because you have a reason to fire people. And so you use that opportunity to restructure, to adopt new technology, maybe not to rehire fully after, and to automate certain processes. And we have seen that in job vacancies, especially these studies use job vacancies, that there was an increase in the skill requirements in the vacancies or higher educational requirements that were posted. But there's also evidence now from several countries that remote working, we have some data now affected, well, you can see the average here is about 40%, but some countries, I can't tell you which one is United States and United Kingdom. I'm sorry for the labels, but you're almost there. In the UK, we're talking about close to 50%. New Zealand, 60% of work was teleworked. And in the UK, there was a very interesting survey. They showed that about 60% of businesses adopted new technologies and new management practices in the context of the crisis. And a third invested in new digital capabilities. And many said that the workforce preparedness or the skills of their workforce were a major barrier to this transformation. But so in this sense, the pandemic is strengthening the upskilling trend that we were seeing before, so increase in skill requirements. For the other megatrends, it's a bit less clear-cut where the direction is going. If we think of demographic developments, for example, there's been a massive decline in migration. There's been life expectancy that's fallen back quite a few years. In Italy, they estimate that the life expectancy has gone back to what it was 20 years ago as a result of the increase, the excess death rate in the context of the crisis, which we all know tends to affect the older the elderly more than the young generation. We expect now soon a fall in the birth rate, because people will be discouraged in starting a family as a result, because of the uncertain situation. There could be a reduction in brain drain as well. So you could expect that there's fewer people moving to other countries. Maybe they will see the value of family, the value of having a network, want to stay in their home country. So there could be potentially a new model for international mobility. In terms of offshoring, we see now reshoring by many companies. There was a big interruption in supply chains in the context of the crisis. So many companies are now thinking of reshoring even more than they were previously. We saw a bit of that before the crisis. Now it's a bit more like that. If we consider that the tasks, at least for developed countries, that were being offshored were mostly low skill tasks, then you can imagine that the demand for low skills is going to rise in some countries, in the host countries, but it's still unclear again how this will play out. And again, for the green transformation, many countries have put green recovery, put some green element in their recovery plans, but others have rolled back their plans because they have because of the financial constraints. So again, it's not clear in which direction skill requirements will go. I think in terms of the implications on skill demands, it remains the case that there is a general upskilling. I think overall the impact of technology will probably win over, and we will have continued, if not accelerated, rising skill demands. But I think there's going to be, so for skills to automate, and also skills that are hard to automate, and also transversal skills, because it will remain the case that we expect the transitions to be more frequent in the labor market, people to change jobs more frequently. So transversal skills that allow you to move from one job to the other, that are transferable, will continue to be important. But I think the crisis also highlighted, and you've said it, Martin, I mean, will we go back to the way we were working before? That's very unclear. Even for a big organization like the OECD, we've been working remotely for 8 months. I don't think we will all of a sudden go back 5 days a week to the office. So, you know, this requires self-organization, it requires motivation, it requires task persistence, even in the absence of continuous prompts or controls from your supervisor, and a fair amount of digital skills. So these are things that we are looking at the moment, and thinking of how they are developed in school, in university, or how can we develop among those who have already left the education system. So as a result of all this, I think the short and the medium run can look quite different for graduates like for others. I think in the lockdown, but also in the phase that we're living now, the social distancing phase, there are still very few job openings. I think there's still many job openings in low-skilled occupations and in the health sector, for obvious reasons in the health sector, because we're all still grappling with a potential second wave, but also in low-skilled occupations, because the sectors that are functioning the best are sectors in essential services. So there's a lot of demand still for security guards, cashiers, supermarkets, deliverers, and so on. And then we continue, especially at the graduate level, with online learning. I mean, luckily, at a lower level of education, we've been able in most countries to restart the schools, which I think is important for the learning of children. We consider that, you know, university students are more independent and can cope with learning online, but this is a new reality even for them. So I think in this context, it's important that that we try and you know, tell graduates in any case to take advantage of emerging opportunities for work. As I said, hirings are down, but it doesn't mean that there aren't openings. There are still openings out there. But perhaps it's important that they also pursue opportunities for internships and apprenticeships as they become available. I think something interesting that I heard of, that I thought of when Martin was speaking, is that in France, actually, for some of our interns to be able to come in now, they've extended the student status until the end of the year. So universities are telling those who graduated in June that they will keep their on the rolls so that they can qualify as students until December so that they can take advantage of apprenticeships, which this year are starting later. Now, I think it's a good opportunity also to fill skill gaps that people may have at all levels. Obviously, even graduates may have areas that they are weaker in. There's a lot of short or targeted online retraining programs that have been made available. And also look for recruitment and matching support, which is available in many countries on online platforms, for example, that inform people about what occupations are still hiring, what are the skill requirements there, and what training is available to take on these opportunities. In the medium term, and this is, I'm almost at the end, we are, so after, let's say, the health emergency, we still expect high-skilled occupations to recover faster than low-skilled occupations. So we expect a high-skilled hiring to pick up. And one problem with this, it will be that there are going to be a lot of low-skilled unemployed entering the labor market, but a lot of high-skilled positions being created. So the transition for governments or for policymakers is going to be very difficult to make. And I think, again, we expect that youth with low basic skills will be supported in their training. I think in the medium term, it's important that young people take advantage of the programs that are available. So, well, I guess the UK doesn't count anymore as benefiting from the youth guarantee programs in Europe, but in many European countries there are programs to help young people who have graduated in the past 4 months. So they are directed to employment, but also training and education opportunities to avoid disengagement, basically. Choose training that is aligned with the skill needs in the labor market. So I mentioned what we thought as OECD as being some of the emerging skills and capabilities that will be relevant in the post-COVID world. Look out for quality when you choose a training provider for those who want to fill their skill gaps and do online learning. There's a lot of offer out there, and many countries, including the UK, have some form of quality assurance for training providers. So I would advise that there is a clear, transparent communication about the quality of the training that people are about to undertake. Also, find out what financial support is available to pay for training. There were programs before, there are even more now. Especially programs that have been extended to include more adults or more youth than they did before, so that they can invest in training while they're waiting to find a new job. And then very important that, we encourage young people to seek for career guidance. I mean, this is very important. It's not important just for youth, it's important for adults as well. That regularly throughout their lifetime, they touch base, they get the information they need on how skill requirements are changing, and so this is a very important service that every young people should know how to find. We've just run a survey actually about accessing career guidance and how people do it and what are the methods. So that I'd be happy to, if you want to tell you a little bit on that. I think that's a central point that overlaps with a lot of the priorities in the skills agenda now. And I'll stop here and answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Glenda. Fantastic. Get started on Q&A. Okay, I've got some questions already come in to me directly through the chat. So if I start with a couple of those, and then if other people have questions, if you want to raise a digital hand up, I've got a readout on my screen here, so I'll try and spot you if you've got a question to ask anybody out there. So just a couple of questions that came in. Do you have a sense of whether the growth in tech jobs will be a kind of net growth in overall jobs, or will the technology that's emerging through all of this create more jobs than it replaces, if you see what I mean.
You want me to answer one by one? Yeah.
You want to, if that's okay with you, and I'll line you another one up in a minute.
Yeah, I think it will. Personally, I think we are, despite the concerns that we've been expressing, we see, I think, very little evidence that net growth in employment is going to has been negative for some reason as a result of digitalization, automation, and so on. The problem is more like there's going to be probably some unequal. I mean, there will be some inequality generated in the sense that as I was saying before, the jobs emerging in the tech sector, but also in other, as a result of automation in other sectors, will be very skill intensive. And the low skilled who are losing their job as a result of automation don't necessarily have the skills to get there. So overall, I mean, the net effect might be zero, but there's still a distributional aspect that we need to keep in mind.
Okay, and just a question I've had on my mind around some of this, and you touched on it in one of your slides about the mobility of, I guess, particularly with this kind of audience in mind, the mobility of graduates. And an organisation spent a lot of time working on things like graduate retention initiatives or stopping brain drain and things like that. Does that matter in the same way now that people are kind of becoming more and more comfortable with working anywhere? A city in the south of Italy or the north of England, where perhaps your economy isn't as strong as other bits of your country, does it matter if you retain graduate talent in that area? Should you still be trying to do that, if those people can work anywhere? How does that change the issues of graduate mobility?
Well, I think geographically, it's probably the case that you can be working anywhere, but here we're talking about who you're working for, right? So if graduates from Italy move to the UK, is to take up UK jobs, even if they stay in Italy ultimately, but they're working for UK companies, is still talent lost for Italy. So that would be my first thought. The other thought is that there is actually, I mean, I always thought like it doesn't matter where we are anymore. Maybe it will be a way to repopulate rural areas because people will see the beauty of it. The truth is that people still, there's still a lot of economies of scale, and people still seem to congregate in bigger cities that are more connected, as opposed to, and this was before COVID, okay? So maybe things have changed to the extent that people now are revisiting that. But even before COVID, we were saying, well, you can work from anywhere, right? So why, thinking of the Silicon Valley or other areas like that, why would you be stuck in a big city, where the quality of life is better and so on? But it didn't quite happen like that. And I think people who study this, who are more than me and look at the geographical distribution of things, would say that there are economies of scale to the extent that people still agglomerate together in big, sufficiently big, or they become big at some point, areas, and it doesn't quite end up benefiting the rural areas development.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting take, I suppose, in terms of that. Yeah, whether in the end, because cities have been around in society for thousands of years, haven't they? They're a powerful force in themselves. But there's a lot of change afoot. Any questions out there? I've got a couple more, but I'm happy to take any from the audience.
Hi, Martin. It's Summer. I can't find anywhere to raise my hand, so I wonder if I can ask a question.
Just go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Glenda, for that really useful presentation. I think on the last slide you talked about how we need to equip the graduates with the skills aligned to the skills that are needed by the labour market, and, for example, the digital skills, as for obvious reasons. I just wonder if enough attention has also been given to some soft skills Because, for example, right now, all of us who are experienced in the work market are grappling with building personal resilience, dealing with isolation and stress and trauma. So, the fresh graduates, when they get a new job, they may be told that you have to work from home for the first 10 months. You may not see any of your colleagues face to face until much later. So is that also an element that we need to prepare our graduates so that they are not going to get a complete shock and get bored very quickly?
Yes, definitely. I think that was the aim of one of the slides where I was saying, there's still the trends that we saw before. So trends, still the importance of skills that protect us against automation, if you want, so high level, but we're still talking about cognitive skills, transversal skills, in the sense of skills that can be, some are soft skills that can help you transition between jobs throughout your career, but also, again, with the pandemic, more emphasis on motivation, on on task persistence, on self-organization. I think that's becoming more and more important. It's less clear to me how you can teach that, and I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that this is a very good topic to look at, and I think we will look at it at the OECD. Personally, I would be very interested. It's one of the things I've been thinking about the most. So how do we teach that in school or university, or and also how do we teach that, if that's possible, to teach later in life to adults? So I don't have an answer for you, but I think on the other hand, if I think of the initiatives that I've seen out there, there have been attempts to motivate people. I've seen, for example, the Apprenticeships UK, I think it's called, and they have a lot of, for people who are on apprenticeships, they've realized that motivation is really low, especially they have everything virtually, like everybody. So the example applies to graduates, it applies to new recruits. And what they do is they have motivational courses, videos throughout, so to deal with self-organization, motivation, again, task persistence, and so on. So I think there have been, especially training providers, people who are, I guess, universities to some extent, I haven't seen as much, are already gearing up for that. So trying to help the people that are training or joining with these, again, training to help them, help their motivation and help them get to the end of, for example, a training course or an internship or so on.
Thank you, Glenda. I was particularly struck by, thanks Summer as well for your question. I was really struck by what you said as well, of that kind of thing about self-motivation, task persistence, digital skills, autonomy, becoming kind of this kind of cohort of attributes, if you like, that both employers and universities are either going to need to develop in people or recruit for in the first place.
Actually, in some work we did, we have actually a survey that looks at the composition of jobs and what people do at work, and self-organization always came through as the key skill that we can say, this was a proxy, but we can say it was in very high demand before. So I think, if anything, the pandemic has increased further the attention of employers to the ability, our ability to self-organize our work, to manage teams at a distance, and so on.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I think it's acute for all of us, isn't it? We're all learning how to do this at the same time as also developing some of this kind of theory. So we're all living it as we kind of try and manage our teams remotely and also develop our own skills at being effective. So okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm really sorry. I know there's a bunch of other questions that have been sent in, but obviously there'll be a chance later. Hopefully, if you are able to pop back later, Glenda, when we're in the sort of when we're having some drinks and chats later, we can hopefully pick those things up. Obviously, I guess people can feel free to connect with you separately as well.
Yes, definitely.
But thank you so much for such a brilliant start. We're running slightly behind overall, but that's because I went on too long at the start, not because you did. So we're just playing catch up on that a little bit. So thank you so much, Glenda. Really appreciate you being here with us again from Paris, and thank you for those great